Welcome to hell. It is early morning on a Caribbean island, and African slaves, hundreds of them, are being sent out to the fields to pull weeds and burn the high, dry grass. Bent over, palms calloused from the small, tough stalks, smoke scorching their eyes, they work. The overseer prowls nearby, mounted on horseback, a rawhide whip fastened to his saddle. The plants that Columbus brought with him to the island he called Hispaniola, now Haiti, and the Dominican Republic, flourished. Soon there were sugar plantations all over the island, and a kind of white gold rush began. More and more Europeans saw growing sugar in the New World, with slave labor as the road to vast wealth. Sugar planting boomed first on Hispaniola. When news spread of the gold of the Aztecs in nearby Mexico, farming could now hold the interest of Spaniards. But that only gave Europeans the opportunity to take the lead in seeking sugar fortunes. The Europeans next made Brazil the center of sugar, with the Catholic Portuguese and the Protestant Dutch battling for control. The British followed by turning Barbados into a sugar island. Then the French found rich soil on Hispaniola all over again. The more sugar was planted, the more mills were built to grind it. The more docks were hammered into place to ship sugar, the more enslaved people were brought from Africa to work the plantations. The first European boat reached Brazil in 1500. It was an accident. Pedro Cabral was trying to sail around Africa to Asia to buy spices for his native Portugal, and the ocean current took him to Brazil instead. That same strong current made it easy to bring slaves across the Atlantic to Brazil, and over the next 400 years, sometimes 3 million Africans were taken to Brazil. As the common saying went, without sugar, no Brazil. Without slaves, no sugar. Without Anguilla, no slaves. In just over 100 years between 1701 and 1810, 252,500 enslaved Africans were brought to Barbados, an island that occupies only 166 square miles, making it today one of the smallest countries in the world. The English then set out to conquer more sugar islands, starting with Jamaica, which they took from Spain in 1665. In the same period that the 252,500 Africans were brought to Barbados, 662,400 Africans were taken to Jamaica. Thus, sugar drove more than 900,000 people into slavery across the Atlantic to Barbados and Jamaica. And these were just two of the sugar islands. The English were eagerly filling Antigua, Nevis, St. Kitts, and Montserrat with slaves and sugar mills. They took over much of Dutch Guiana for the same reason. Seeing the fortunes being made in sugar, the French started their own scramble to turn the half of the island of Hispaniola that they control, which is now Haiti, as well as Martinique, Guadeloupe, and French Guyana along the South African coast near Dutch Guiana into their own sugar colonies, which were filled with hundreds of thousands more African slaves. By 1753, British ships were taking an average of 34,250 slaves from Africa every year, and by 1768, that number had reached 53,100. The sugar that piled up on the docks near the plantation was something new in the world. Pure sweetness, pure pleasure, so cheap that common people could afford it. Scientists have shown that people all around the world must learn to like salty tastes, sour tastes, mixed tastes. But from the moment we are born, we crave sweetness. Cane sugar was the first product in human history that perfectly satisfied that desire. And the bitter lives of the enslaved Africans produced so much sugar that pure sweetness began to spread around the world. Between the 1600s and the 1800s, sugar drove the entire economy linking Europe, Africa, Asia, and the Americas. The true age of sugar had begun, and it was doing more to reshape the world than any ruler, empire, or war had ever done. A cycle of death and sweetness. The millions of Africans taken to work in sugar were not taught to read and write. They were not meant to speak, but to work. Olada Equiano, who lived from approximately 1745 to 1797, later claimed that he was an African taken to Barbados to work in sugar. He did learn to write and recounted his life story in an autobiography. Equiano described what it was like to arrive in Barbados and to be sold off to the sugar planters. We were conducted immediately to the merchant's yard, where we were all pent up together, like so many sheep in a fold. On a signal given as the beat of a drum, the buyers rush at once into the yard where the slaves are confined, and make choice of that parcel that they like the best. Because he was slight and sickly, as well as smart and useful, Equiano managed not to be sold to a plantation. So while his words take us from Africa to the sugar islands, even his memoir does not take us to the fields. That means we cannot hear the voices of the Africans directly. To tell that story, we must begin with what they did, how sugar shaped their lives. For an African, whether you were sent to the Caribbean or South America, you were now part of the sugar machine. And it did not much matter where your ship landed. You could be working in the fertile fields of Brazil or the hills of Jamaica. The brutal cycle of making sugar was much the same. If the terrain was not too rocky or hilly, you might be part of a group of slaves who drove teams of oxen to draw plows across the fields. On rougher ground, you were sent out to clear a space 5 inches deep and 5 feet square. Then you dug holes for the cane shoots in the cleared squares. You needed to work quickly and without stopping. Overseers watched closely to make sure of that, beating slaves who did not carve out at least 28 holes an hour on one French island. The painstaking work had just one aim: to plant a crop that would end up taking the life of every worker who touched it. As Equiano explained, the sugar slaves could hardly rest when their day was done. Their huts, which ought to be well covered, and the place dry where they take their little repose, are often open sheds.